It is exactly 9 on the button. Take it away, Christy.
Great. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar on measuring internal communications. It's going to be a great session, and we're super excited to be joining you today from beautiful Vancouver, BC. We'll get started in a few minutes, but in the meantime, we'd love if you could say hello in the chat using the chat function and let us know where you are joining from. We'll give everyone another minute to trickle in.
We usually start webinars much later, but I was insistent as a prompt person that I wanted to start this webinar right on time. Oh, I see we got some messages in the chat.
Wow, calling from everywhere. Colorado, Alberta.
Is this going to make me want to travel?
It's definitely making me want to travel. London, Connecticut. Oh, I got it's we're all in different time zones, it looks like. Great. Well, why don't we get started, Kelly, if that works for you. And to kick things off today, we actually have a poll. You should all see something pop up, a poll pop up on your screen. So I think we all know the importance of measuring our internal communications efforts, but it can often be pretty challenging to find the time, the tools and the resources to consistently and effectively measure our efforts. So we'd love if you could use the chat, the polling function to let us know if you have measured your communication efforts for the year. Wow, a lot of varied responses. You know, personally, I try to always be measuring, but I do have a few reports that I need to wrap up by the end of the year. It's on my to-do list. But yeah, wow. So it sounds like most people are in the same boat as me, not yet, but you plan to. And then about 20% do not measure internal comms. Well, hopefully today's webinar will really set you up for success. Number one, to tie up any loose ends for the year and show your value as an internal communicator, your efforts, but also set you up for success in 2022. We can move to the next slide. So my name is Christy, and I'm with the marketing team here at ThoughtFarmer, and I'm joined by Kelly Backey, who is our senior content writer and the author of our recent white paper on measuring internal communications. We're both so excited to be here today with you. If there's anything you'd like to ask our team, please use the Q&A function, and we'll get to your question at the end of today's session. We will be recording today's session, so if you would like to rewatch it or share it with your team, you will definitely be able to do that. As mentioned, Kelly just authored this really valuable white paper to help you measure in internal communications. If you haven't already downloaded the white paper, you can visit the resources page on thoughtfarmer.com. So today, Kelly is going to be walking you all through the steps to measuring internal comms, including how to get started, conducting a communications audit, and how to set yourself up for success in 2022. We'll then close today's session with the Q&A. So again, please post your questions in the Q&A box. Next slide. So for those who may not be familiar with ThoughtFarmer, we're here to really make work better. And a big part of that is helping internal communicators break through the noise and get your messages seen, heard, and acted on. You are often charged with driving employee engagement and nurturing company culture, which is no easy task given that you're often working with limited resources and it's still an extremely volatile climate. So ThoughtFarmer's intranet solution really provides the tools to engage your remote workforce and enables you to easily create content and critical announcements and measure the effectiveness of your internal communication efforts with in-app analytics. As always, for more information, you can check out thoughtfarmer.com. And with that, I will hand you over to Kelly.
Thank you, Christy. I'm super excited about this webinar, primarily because I used to be an internal communications professional. So I really understand the challenges of measuring and proving success. And I have to say, I'm kind of jealous because when I was working in internal communications 10 years ago, there was little to none measurement of anything. Intranets were still rare. Instant messaging apps were even rarer. And if we were measuring email analytics, it was outbound communication. It wasn't internal. So really, it was no wonder that my boss and colleagues were kind of looking at me going, does she really do anything? But fast forward to now, and there are all these fabulous tools for measuring and proving success. But of course, there's still a lot of work. So I like to start with the why, because if you don't understand why you are measuring internal communication, it will feel like work, and then you'll end up resenting it. So understanding the significance of measuring internal communications will help you stay focused and motivated throughout the process. And it can also help you set some tangible goals. Your why may be unique to your organization, and you may have your own reasons for measuring internal communications, but there are a few reasons why you should. So there's lots of examples here, and I won't go through all of them, but we'll definitely include them in the follow-up. But I think some of the big ones here for me relate to budget, because whether you are thinking about adding more technology or initiatives, or whether you are having to defend your current spend, you're going to need the data to back it up. And of course, the last one is my favorite, to make you look like a hero. Despite the pandemic putting internal comms folks on the map, it is still an undervalued job. And really, let's be honest, you comms people are amazing. You are out there being super strategic while at the same time being detail-oriented with your messaging. So all the more reason why you should want to emerge as the hero. And if you're still struggling with your why, look at your organizational goals, maybe your core values, and if possible, try to align your internal comms goals with these, and your executives will love you for that. So next thing is conduct an audit. So this might not be super quick, but it isn't as exhausting or as comprehensive as something like an internal content audit. So all we're really asking you to do here is to identify all the different communication tools within your organization. So this could include your intranet, newsletters, email, instant messaging apps, or any way you have to disperse communication throughout your organization. And if you ran any town halls, you'd include it here. And don't forget to include the less obvious channels as well, things like bulletin boards, internal podcasts, or even project management tools. The point here is to get you brainstorming about all your comms channels so that you don't miss any. So now that you have a good understanding of all your internal communication tools, it's time to find out what your employees really think of them and just how effective they are. So the best way to do this is to send out an employee survey. So surveys are fantastic because they give you real insight right from employees. And we're going to get to analytics further down, but surveys are powerful in a different way, because as much as analytics from tools like your intranet provide value, they do not give you an understanding of why or where your employees are getting frustrated. So to get to the heart of your comms efforts, you will need to hear directly from your employees. And running a survey periodically can show the strengths and weaknesses of your comms efforts over time. And it can also provide guidance of how your team can focus their efforts. And I just want to say, I know survey fatigue is a real concern, but for me personally, I love surveys because they are a simple reminder that my organization cares what I think and values my input. So there are obviously many questions to consider, including in your survey. Just to highlight a few, do you understand the corporate goals and how your work ties to them? And if you are a new employee, do you understand where to access onboarding information? And hopefully you have a way of easily managing your surveys so that this doesn't become too much work. So within Thought Farmer, we have a feature called Form Flow that makes it super easy to capture data and share it. So some simple tips, keep it concise. It's probably kind of obvious, but if you want a high response rate, you don't want to burden your employees with pages of questions. And also consider making the survey anonymous because this will help increase the response rate. So another powerful way of collecting internal communication data is through a focus group. So the main advantage of these groups is that they allow you to generate real conversations that shed light on deeper areas of concern. So even in hybrid or remote workplace settings, virtual focus groups can still produce very strong results. And if you've never conducted a focus group, it's fairly easy. You'll just want to consider inviting employees from a variety of different departments within your organization. As your colleagues may not be as excited as you are about this meeting, you might want to bribe them with something like a free lunch or a gift card, just to thank them for their valuable time and input. And while a focus group can be conducted at any time, it's beneficial to host one after reviewing the results of your internal communication survey. From here, you can select a few areas of interest and determine which questions you might want to ask your focus group. So to help you understand how you might end up presenting this data in a PowerPoint presentation or some type of other presentation, we've sketched out what the information would look like that would potentially go on these slides. So you might want to add the number of participants, the departments represented, any chief concerns that were cited. And then also don't forget to discuss things that went well, because that's just as important. So a few tips to consider, make sure you have a strong purpose and a desired outcome. Keep it limited to 5 or 6 questions. And prioritize solutions so it doesn't end up being a venting session. And finally, try concluding the focus group meeting by asking participants to list the one thing they would like changed. On to the next one, exit interviews. Now, exit interviews aren't something we tend to think about when measuring internal communications, which is why I wanted to highlight it in this webinar. It's an overlooked way of collecting extremely valuable feedback and a great opportunity to see if communication played a role in any turnover. For example, maybe a departing employee feels as though they weren't recognized for their efforts, or perhaps they feel they were not included in important communication. Another rising factor in employee turnover is the desire to work remotely. So this is not directly related to internal comms. However, if your organization does not currently support remote work because they do not have the tools, it can quickly become an internal communications challenge. Mental health is also an important consideration. Do your employees feel supported in their role? Do they feel supported by management? Again, not directly a communication concern, but it definitely plays a role. So what might this slide look like in your presentation? Similar to a focus group, we want to start with the number of employees who departed. Include their average tenure. And list any reasons cited for their departure. And again, like this may not have anything to do with internal comms, but my hunch is that you're going to see a subtle tie-in. As you comms folks know, almost everything could be correlated to communication. So some quick tips, make sure you aligned with HR on this. You will absolutely need their support. And start planning for this next year by determining which questions you will want to ask. Next up is reviewing your meeting analytics. So with the majority of employees working remotely or in a hybrid setting, many meetings over the last year were hosted on video platforms. So this was especially true for large-scale company-wide meetings like town halls. Now, most dedicated video platforms have some type of analytics package, especially if it is a platform suited to hosting audiences in the thousands. They even have things like sentiment analysis. So if you run town hall meetings, this is especially useful as it helps you gain insight into if employees understood the content presented. Other analytics include length of view by webcast attendee, as well as response rate, which can be captured through survey, poll, and questions by attendees. If you are a Thought Farmer user and you are using our intranet to post your video meetings, you can measure the success through our media report. This report allows you to see how your users are interacting with video and audio content. You can see which videos are the most popular, how many times a video has been watched, whether users have watched it to an end. You can also see which locations users are watching videos from, the actions that they took before and after watching a video, and how interaction with video changes over time. So some tips, get creative with your meeting segmentation. Obviously, this is easier if you have large volumes of data to deal with, but look for anything that stands out. For example, is there a particular department or team that tunes in more than others? Is there a team that seems to drop off or tune out? And make sure to upload all your meetings to your intranet so you can continue to monitor view counts. Next is email analytics. Now, for a long time, this was the only way to measure comm success. But as other platforms have won over employees' attention, email isn't as critical for employee communication as it was 10 to 15 years ago, but it still plays an important role. So even if email isn't your prime communication channel, it is still worth measuring the efforts of newsletters or event invitations. So monitoring your email analytics can also help provide insight into your overall internal communication plan and help you plan for the future. So for example, a very low open rate may indicate that email is not the most effective internal communications tool to reach your employees. Regardless, internal communication professionals have a responsibility to ensure that employees are not overly burdened with emails. To measure the impact of your emails, you'll want to measure things like open rates, click-through rates, and if possible, attention rate or average read time. And depending on your email platform, you might have a way to simply export a snapshot of your email analytics into your presentation. Quick tip, 65% of internal emails are never opened. So if you are experiencing the same outcome, it might be time to rethink, is this the best channel for internal communications? Next up, measuring critical announcements. So normally I would have recommended that critical announcements play a role in all your comms channels, and they do. But I think it's also worth separating out your critical communications. The reason is because, as we've seen during the pandemic, it is critical that critical information can change quickly. And often it is information that you absolutely need to disseminate to your employees, especially in an emergency. So as we have not entirely navigated ourselves out of this pandemic, we are all going to need a way to get rapid information to employees. So consider which channels you are using to disseminate this information currently, but more importantly, do you have a way of ensuring all employees have access to this information? So within Thought Farmer, we have two ways of making sure employees are informed. We have a feature called Broadcast, which recipients are notified on email and in their intranet pages as a banner. Administrators can later view these statistics for the broadcast to discover how many people viewed the banner and how many clicked through to the email. This becomes a great source of feedback for future content publishing and better audience targeting. Meanwhile, our required reading feature allows you to designate essential content on your intranet as a mandatory read. So if you really want to ensure a message is read, you could use required reading in conjunction with broadcast. And it's really just about covering all your bases, ensuring that you have done everything in your control to get your communications read. So I've hinted a lot that measuring your internal communications is really powerful to share with your leadership. And with everything that has gone on in the last few years, I think leadership are going to want to know, one, do you have a way of communicating with employees in emergency? And two, can you prove that employees have received this communication? So yeah, super powerful to share. Okay, next up, intranet analytics. Probably my favorite. Okay, yes, you know, at Thought Farmer, we make intranet software, so of course I was going to say that. But intranets provide a ton of data. And since this webinar is about measuring communication, here's where you can get really granular with your data. So intranet analytics provide an in-depth understanding of which pages have the highest visits and where your employees are engaging with content, and more importantly, which areas they're not. So your intranet solution hopefully includes an intranet statistics package. If you are a Thought Farmer user, metrics will begin accumulating as soon as users interact with the platform. Once these metrics accumulate, you can easily view them in a dashboard and then pull reports. Thought Farmer also makes it super easy to set up goals and conversions. Now, when we think about intranet analytics, we typically measure things like reach, top users, usage, page hierarchy, content engagement, community metrics, and cost savings. I won't get too deep on this. I could do an entire webinar on this before. I think we've done a webinar on this. But I will say that we do have a blog post called 8 Key Intranet Metrics You Should Be Tracking. And we go into a deeper dive into that. So yeah, there's so much to say on this topic. And we'll include a link to that blog in the webinar recap. Some tips, and again, get creative with segmentation. Try to understand which departments or locations are getting high visitation. Be careful with the outliers. You will always have super users and you will always have those that will never engage at all. Similar with meeting analytics, try to look at large volumes of data if possible. And finally, don't forget to measure your mobile users. There was once a time where frontline workers and deskless employees had little to no access to a corporate intranet. Now that they do, what can you learn from this group and how they navigate? Okay, now for the best part, presenting your findings. So this is a part that I have always struggled with. I'm not a graphics wizard, so I thank my lovely colleagues, Christy and Ian, for creating this presentation for me. If it was up to me, it would probably be 3 slides with a lot of text. So I'm really grateful when people understand how to make data and content look good. And I love to see fancy charts and humor in presentations. And so I'm envious of anyone who can do that. But if you're looking for some great presentation, check out our friends at Brilliant Inc. They are an internal communications agency, and they have some incredible tips on how to incorporate storytelling into your data. And finally, it's never too late to prepare for next year. So if this webinar is leaving you with a lot of sighs and a lot of frustrations that you didn't plan all this sooner or that it's too late, now is your chance. 2022 is just around the corner, so why not use this time now to get ahead? So start benchmarking your data. It will give you something to measure and hopefully improve in the future. Also use this time to really understand all your organization's variables, like your size, your industry, your busy periods. It all plays a role. And again, I suggest being strategic with questions that you want to ask on upcoming employee surveys. Now that you have some data in place, what can you learn to take that data to the next step? And we mentioned earlier about inserting communications related questions into exit interviews. Go do that now. So that brings us to the conclusion of our webinar. Hopefully these tips help simplify the process while alleviating stress. I just want to say investing in platforms and technology that do all the heavy lifting for you will make future measurement so much easier. This allows you to spend less time trying to collect and crunch the numbers and more time creating effective communications that contribute towards your strategic goals. So if you're looking for an intranet platform that makes measuring success simple, or you would like to see a demonstration of our award-winning intranet software, please reach out to us to learn more. And with that, I will turn it back over to Christy to see if we have any questions.
Great. So yeah, we did have some great questions.
Oh, you're still on mute.
Hello? Hello?
Can we hear you, Christy?
Hello? Okay, perfect. Yes.
Okay, well, while you're starting
Can you hear me?
the mute, I will read off a few questions that I see coming in. What if the results of my internal communication is really bad? I've been there. You know what? I try to look at it as you can only go up. So and start. I think that at this point you just really want to just do your benchmarks and then focus. And then I think you want to also show your leadership that you have a plan in place to improve it. So I wouldn't necessarily look at bad communication as a good thing, as long as you have a strategic plan tied to it. I think your leadership is really going to like that. Christy, do we have you yet?
Yes, yes. I am.
You are still muted for me. I cannot hear you. So I'm just going to continue reading the questions here. Jen says, I get low response on surveys. Any tips to improve this? Yeah, that's a tough one. I did share a little bit of this earlier on. You know, I think sometimes you need to, oh, someone's saying that they can all hear you, Christy. Why can't I hear you?
Yes.
Just to quickly answer that question, low response rate on surveys. Yeah, I would focus on communicating to your employees why you want their feedback. And I think that is super powerful because when they understand what the meaning is for the survey, they are more likely to get involved. So I'm going to stop talking right now. Apparently everyone can hear you, Christy. I just can't. So I'm going to let you, although if you ask any questions, I won't be able to answer. This is very odd.
Those, we actually had 2 questions.
I'll just keep going through these questions. Any tips on which metrics or KPIs would impress leadership? Probably anything with an ROI attached to it. I think that's probably super valuable if you can show that. Especially when it comes to your intranet analytics. I think if you can prove reduce time looking for information, that's a huge one of demonstrating knowledge share. So there's that. Speaking of leadership, this report seems like it would take a long time. What if I don't get approval? Do you have any templates I can use? Yes, so we recently co-hosted a webinar with Brilliant Inc. and they provided a toolkit for this. So I think what we can do is probably maybe share a link with that with our webinar attendees, and it's a toolkit for helping to measure internal comms. I think there's something they did that was pretty brilliant, so I'll make sure that I include that in the post webinar follow-up. Clearly there's some weird audio challenges, but if you have any questions, I promise that we will respond to all of them. So if you put them in the Q&A, we will definitely follow up in person or through email at least. So thank you everyone who attended. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to what I had to say today, and hopefully you can measure your internal communication success. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.